Welcome to episode 101 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on June 19th, 2023. It's a new season of the podcast, and there is a lot to share. I will get to most of that in the next episode. This episode, I'm bringing you in on a chat I had with Susan Anderson, editor of the Journal of Scottish Yarns. We talk about her textile background, wool and textile history, and our upcoming make-along. Let's get to it. This is the point where I usually thank my sponsors and patrons when I have an interview lined up. If you are on social media or are one of my sponsors, then you probably know that I am switching things up a bit. Time is tight in this episode, so I'm saving a fuller explanation for the next episode, which I am hoping to release next week rather than in 2 weeks. For now, though, I would like to offer one final heartfelt thanks to all of you who have financially supported the show through the years. Morehouse Farm and Knit New Haven are two businesses that have directly sponsored the show for several years now. It's hard doing this sort of thing to find business partners that you feel 100% comfortable accepting financial backing from. But I am a true fan of the yarn produced by Morehouse Farm, and Knit New Haven is a welcoming shop with quality goods that supports the community of knitters in New Haven and further afield. I could not have asked for better partners. And of course, my patrons, a collection of individuals who stepped up one by one to show that they supported this work that I'm doing in my corner of the fiber world. That has been hugely edifying for me. With deep gratitude, I offer my heartfelt thanks to you all. If this is the first you're hearing about the changes, I will say the show's not going anywhere. And as I said, I'll talk about it more next week. For now, though, I want to get us into this interview with Susan Anderson. I've had the good fortune to speak with Susan many times now, and I always look forward to it. I feel like I have met my match in this space. She is as interested in the questions of wool as I am, if not more so. Questions like, if it's so useful, why aren't we using it? Why is it treated as a byproduct instead of as a resource? How can we turn that around? And she's moving through the history of Scottish textiles, learning about their impact on Scotland and the world in the past and today, and sharing that information with us. Her medium is the printed word. The Journal of Scottish Yarns made its debut last year. It's a high-quality publication with articles addressing all of the above, plus interviews with current designers and yarn producers, and a selection of patterns in each. Issue 3 was released at the end of May and has a focus on linen, with articles about how it's grown, processed, and used in our time, as well as how linen shaped the lives and economies of the past. We are having a make-along together. Issue 3 has 10 projects ranging from wearables to accessories worked in wool or linen and created using knitting, crochet, or pin loom weaving. I've been swatching ahead of our cast on date on July 28th of this year, and you should be too. There will be weekly prizes from the journal as well as some additional prizes from makers involved with this issue. There's a discount code in the show notes so you can download the issue and get planning, and more details will follow the interview. But for now, I want to move into that. Please enjoy this chat with Susan Anderson, editor of the Journal of Scottish Yarns. Thank you, Susan, for coming on the show. I always like to start an interview by talking about your experience with textiles. So how did you first begin your textile journey?
Like a lot of people, it was family, and it was actually my mother's mum, so my gran. So she had always made things, and I always saw her knitting or crocheting. And then latterly, she was making bobbin lace. She used to run an old people's home in Lincolnshire in England, the east of England. And one of the residents that she had in the home was very good at making bobbin lace and taught her. And when my gran retired and came back up to Scotland, to Greenock, just to the west of Glasgow, she carried on and she ended up teaching people herself. And I used to go to lace days with her. And on reflection, I realised that this, of course, was what yarn festivals were going to be in the future in my life. But instead of wool, it was people selling beautiful hand-turned bobbins. So yeah, she taught me. I learned how to crochet first, and then knit, and then later, I think I was a teenager, to make bobbin lace. And me and my sister, my twin, and we always got on really well. Every summer holiday or every weekend was, shall we make something? And we didn't know what we'd make. Let's just make something.
That's fantastic. So already we're going to go on a tangent because I want to hear more about your experience with bobbin lace, because that's not easy. So my daughter's had some lessons with bobbin lace, and she tells me it's just 4. You're just working with 4 at a time, 4 of the bobbins at a time. So if you keep that in mind, and I'm like, well, yeah, but it might just be 4, but you have like 30 in front of you.
Well, you can have hundreds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's all the different types, and I was taught how to make torsion lace, which is quite geometric looking, but there's Honiton, which is so fine, and I can't even think of all the different names, but the particular one I liked, and I remember there was like a rose pattern, and there were spiders and this, but I do remember there was half stitch and whole stitch, and everything was made out of half stitch, whole stitch and twists. I could remember half stitch and whole stitch, but I look at like a rose stitch, and it's the most beautiful geometric pattern. Luckily there's books and now the internet to remember, but I still got all the bobbins, all the wooden bobbins, and I actually inherited all my grand's as well. But I don't have any pillows. The pillows are the cushions that you actually put the lace onto and are working on this pillow. We used to use polystyrene of all things, but I think the best ones had like horsehair and things like that. And so yeah, maybe that's something I'll get back into in the future. I would like to.
When my daughter started, so she saw someone doing a demonstration at a fair and started talking to her, and it was an older woman, and she offered to do a few lessons with her. And she had my daughter, so the oatmeal here comes in cylinder cardboard containers. And so she said, get one of those and cover it with batting and fabric and just use that. So that's what my daughter uses when she uses hers for her pillow.
Oh, amazing.
Just cheap and cheerful. It just does the job.
Yeah, because you could use like the inside of a carpet roll cut or some really sturdy. That's a good idea, and would have never thought of that.
So it was enough to get her started with it, and she carried on for a while, and then the pandemic hit and we weren't able to meet with the lady anymore. So unfortunately we got to find another teacher for her. But yeah, I'm obsessed with watching people do bobbin lace. It just scares me. I need to just sit down and do it one of these times, and I think I'll be fine.
Yeah, just like a bookmark, something like that. You have got a very limited strip and then very few bobbins relatively to do it. Right. But it's like knitting. It's the stitches in front of you that you're focusing on, because you colour work. You have this garment, especially if you've done the sleeves, you've done the yoke, it's all over colour work, but you're just focusing on the stitch that's in front of you, and the rest is emerged on your knee.
That's right. Yeah, just focus on what's in front of you at the time. I like that. That's a good tip. Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to put in a request for a future issue to have some information about bobbin lace. I'm just going to put that out there.
It's a really good idea, and there is a Scottish connection to lace making. And I actually don't know if it's just machined lace, but it must have started somewhere. And it's like everything else in the magazine. Like somebody asked me, I think it was an American tour group who was in one of the shops in Edinburgh, asked me about cashmere. How come Scotland's famous for cashmere? I have no idea, because as far as I know, we never had cashmere goats, or not in any big way. That will be a future issue. I'll find out and I'll let you know.
I just heard about that sometime in the last year, because I saw someone talking about bringing the cashmere goats back to Scotland and how there used to be an industry and they're trying to revive it. And I said,
yeah,
I had no idea cashmere in Scotland. What? So yeah, there you go. Another issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, because we've got Lunan Bay on the East Coast too, are breeding cashmere goats. I think there's some small herds, but it must have been in 16th century, something like that. We must have been bringing cashmere from the Middle and Far East, and it must be related to the Silk Road.
I was in Iceland early last year, I want to say, and I was speaking with I'll put a link to her farm in the show notes. But she raises cashmere goats in Iceland, and she said that it was the Viking goats, that came over with the Vikings. And then over time, they evolved to have more of the cashmere undergrowth to stay warmer. And that's how that goat developed into a cashmere style goat. Yeah. So it was independent of the goats from the Far East.
Wow. So
So
it's a bit
yeah,
like the North Atlantic sheep breed. So they've got two coats.
exactly.
They've got a fine under one and then the outer coarse one.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Isn't it? Isn't this stuff fascinating?
It is. And as you've said, yeah, it's just one thing leads you down a rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
But that's, yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about your issues is reading your welcome letter. And to be honest, normally I skip those at the beginning of magazines or journals because I want to get to the good stuff, But I always read your letter because it always conveys the sense of astonishment and excitement about what you've discovered as you've been putting these magazines together. It's fascinating. I keep saying, eventually I'm going to get tired of this and want to move on to another obsessive niche or something, but there's just still so much to learn.
I'm not going to run out of content.
Yeah, no, not at all.
There's so much going on. In issue 2, I had an article about the history of tartan. So I was aware that we've got a red list of endangered crafts in Britain, and kilt making is on that list. And I was introduced to one of the kilt makers, the Kilt Makery, actually, who run courses in teaching kilt making. And that has just led me down a whole other tartan-related kilt making route, let alone the people who are making contemporary garments that bring forward the historic kilt making. So there you go. I thought I'd done tartan. No, I don't think you ever do any subject.
Your issues are just so full of information, and they just send me looking for more information, and I have to set aside more time for them, honestly, because I just I have a search engine open as I read, and I told you I started taking notes yesterday as I was reading through because I was like, I got to remember this. This is good stuff. And I took 3 pages of notes as I read through the articles.
Well, it's been lovely that I've had some people describe it as more of a coffee table book. And I do love the idea that it's something that you can go back to and refer to. And the information, and I suppose it's the questions that I have in my head, and I've got a big list of future topics as well, which I try and keep in a spreadsheet too, so I don't forget any. Just keep adding to it. And there's just so many connections, so many themes, so many things to go and look into. And part of the thing for me is just the wonder of how connected things are. And the history, I had no idea, as it's a big article and theme actually in issue 3 about linen. I had no idea just how big linen was in Scotland. And a big reason why I didn't know is because of the history that we get taught at school. It's more British history than local history. And what I was taught, I probably forgot as well. We tend to get taught the Industrial Revolution, but linen as the major industry after agriculture in Scotland was before the Industrial Revolution.
That article was fascinating. Well, there were several articles about linen, and together you get a very complete picture, or grounding anyway, in the linen production that took place in Scotland. Everything from sowing the seeds to the finished garment. And it was fascinating to read and to understand how linen production shaped the cities in Scotland and commerce. And from there, of course, society and the economic connections and everything. It was absolutely fascinating to read. And sorry, and I was going to say about the industrial, how it happened before the Industrial Revolution, about how flax is harvested and how it can't be done with heavy machinery. And so it sort of got left behind because of that. And you just think, what a shame, because how absolutely useful it is. And
people are trying to bring it back as one of the regenerative textiles. And I don't think, and this is part of the discussions that are going on just now, so Scotland is famous for its textiles, but we're never going to be a mass producer for various good and maybe not so good reasons. And that maybe means there is more chance that linen production might happen in Scotland again in a big way. You need, unfortunately, I think I actually said this in the article, a large, cheap, in inverted commas, labour force to process linen, because it is so labour intensive and so skilled in the Western world, or, well, yes, anyway, that's a whole topic to go down, the economics of it. And we started seeing some things in there as well. But again, that sort of global poverty linked to the local poverty. So we ended up in Scotland being known for producing coarse linen called Osnaburg. And that was in spite of there being an awful lot of efforts to persuade the population to produce fine linen. But the poverty of the population meant that couldn't afford the raw materials, couldn't afford to have the input of a sort of consistent quality of raw materials, and there wasn't the demand for fine linens. It was the coarse, practical stuff. So, it's fascinating how the economics, and despite all the efforts, you end up going back to what the common denominator is.
Yeah.
I suspect there was a bit of stubbornness in the population as well. They tried to use the spread of linen processing and production to quietening the clans after Culloden as well, which I thought I had no idea.
Another tidbit I'd picked up from somewhere else too that sort of got tied in was that when I was researching Shetland lace a year or two ago, one of the reasons why they had so many spinning wheels in Unst was because someone had tried to bring linen production to Unst, and the flax wouldn't grow properly there. But again, they ended up with all these spinning wheels. And so when they decided, well, next, let's try lace, they already had all the wheels there for people to be able to spin with.
And the skill to spin very fine lace.
Exactly.
Yarn for lace.
And then that's what took off. But yeah, there's quite a few instances that come up in the articles about, different sort of government schemes to try and, as you were saying, to try and promote this over that, and how they worked out. Fascinating stuff.
Yes.
Everyone, fascinating. Absolutely.
So many tangents.
We are at so many tangents. I want to back up again. Let's go back in time again. So you are knitting and crocheting and doing bobbin lace, but that is very different from producing a print journal. How did that jump happen?
Well, that's a good question. And it took me 30 years or more. So I've spent 30 years working in financial services, in banks and places like that, and working on some really interesting projects with some great people, learning lots of skills, how to produce something, how to understand problems, how to understand what the end result required was, and then work back how to produce that. So I suppose those skills then applied to something that I, dare I say, I'm actually interested in. I was interested, but not in the same way that I'm interested in Scottish textiles. Being able to see the end result, and I'd done some work with a friend in some group coaching, which was such a positive thing. So we talked about values. The coach had us thinking about how we wanted things to be, and to see them and feel them and smell them. And there were some chefs on the course, by the way. But I could feel, this must have been spring 2021, and I was still working in a bank at the time. I could feel the weight, and I could even visualise the size of what this was going to be, and was beginning to see the colours. So I wanted it to be something that was going to be colourful but calm, quite a few contradictory words. And it was through that coaching over the 30 years, realising that I was never actually going to meet my values working for somebody else and doing something that wasn't as creative as I needed it to be, that I finally made the leap, having thought of this idea really from a few different angles. The main one was that I wanted to be able to say that I knit for work. So one of the things that I love to do, and it's for the fun of it, but it's also because this is something that I put my name to, and therefore I want it to be as absolutely as good as possible. Therefore I want to be making all the designs that are in the magazine. And if I don't have time to do them all, actually my sister, she does the other ones, and we enlist help. So there was that reason. And another one was that I realised how little I know about Scottish textiles, but also how passionate I am about the people that I've met and want to hear their stories. And I thought, well, maybe other people might be interested in that. And actually, I would really like work that allowed me to go and do that research. So there was that. And then some other questions, which were kind of back to my economic background. I have to confess, I was an accountant when I started out. I always feel like I should apologise for that, maybe not. I'd never understand why wool is worth so little. And
Yeah.
that's not just a Scottish problem. So I just want to understand, and I want to see if there's anything I can do to help. Yeah, so those were the main reasons. So I started this journal, and the first thing I did, actually, the first meeting I had was with a printer, because I was working out what was going to be involved, both task-wise, what the plan would be, what the timeline was, when I could possibly produce the first one, and actually then what the costs were going to be. So
Right.
by the time I put together a case, was this going to be something that would work, be sustainable? In other words, I could afford it with savings, knowing that this was going to take a few years to build up. I really just started putting it together in bits like that. And then the final bit that really got me to starting was I took the leap. I left where I was working in August 2021. And then at the start of September, funnily enough, the coach in this group coaching conversation that I was involved with, she actually just said to the group, have you heard of this September thing where you just sign up to doing something for 10 minutes every day? No, never heard of it. And it might be go outside for 10 minutes, practice your piano for 10 minutes, dance for 10 minutes, could be anything. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to do something for 10 minutes every day. And I'd been building a list of things, stuff, activities, content, designers, yarn that I wanted to include in the magazine, and I thought might be in some way related to actually producing it. And every day in that September, I just did one thing on that list. So one of the things was finding a printer and going and meeting him. Another one was contacting a designer, which was actually Emily Williams, Flutterby Knits. And then that led to a conversation with her. And that just got me going, because starting a magazine, extremely daunting thing, but it was just one step at a time, just one thing led to another, and putting it all together.
That's so wonderful to think that, just those little steps, consistency can lead to such wonderful results.
Yeah, and it made it much less scary because it was just one thing, and one conversation might have kiboshed the whole idea, but it was just one conversation, one bit, not too scary, put it all together, and look, it does add up to something.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what a thing. The issues are just fantastic. Do you mind if we sort of go through the previous ones and then we can talk about issue 3?
Yeah, not at all.
So you sent me issue 1 and 2 while I was in Shetland, actually, and I picked up issue 1 and was just stuck in my chair until I'd read all the articles, because it was just fascinating. I will say it's not nice to have favorites, right? You're not supposed to have favorites, but I had a wonderful experience, I will say, with the first article in the first issue called Threads in Time, about the Great Tapestry. It is a massive tapestry that tells the history of Scotland. It's beautifully written. The article itself tells the history that is in the tapestry. And I'm reading through like, oh, this history is fascinating. And then about halfway through, it clicks with me again. Oh, wait, all of this is depicted in a tapestry. Like there's a place in Scotland where I can go see all of this in tapestry form. And it just hit me how much work and creativity went into it. And I went back to the opening page where there's the spread of the image, and I'm just absolutely gobsmacked by this project. Have you been to see it in person?
Several times.
Oh.
And the first time I went to see it, which was at the beginning of September 2021, actually,
Mm-hmm.
I spent 3 hours and I only stared intently at about 50 of the 160 panels.
Uh-huh.
And it was one of the guides who turned out to be Susie Finlayson, who was one of the stitchers and actually had designed one of it's a crewelwork pattern inspired by the Great Tapestry of Scotland in issue 1, came up to me and, what are you doing? Why are you spending so long? Because I think, from what I've heard, people do spend a long time looking at it, because each panel is 100 centimetre square, a metre. And as I said, there's 160 of them. But the detail that you look at and the different stitches and the colours, and sometimes there's something that the stitcher has added with permission of the project, obviously. So Susie, for example, there's a panel about Fair Isle, which is one of the ones that I use in the magazine, where she's added a tiny little red helicopter. because her husband was involved in a helicopter crash. He survived, you'll be glad to know, and is all fit and well now, isn't that? But that happened at the time that Susie was involved in stitching that panel. So she added some of her personal history. And it's that overview of the Scottish history, but then these little bits of personal history that something like 3,000 stitchers were involved in actually creating this. I might have got that number wrong. Every way you look at it, it's amazing. And it's now in a purpose-built building in Galashiels in the Borders, which is beautiful and has a very good cafe.
Oh, good to know. You just got back from Galashiels, did you not?
Yes.
Yeah, you were just at a fiber festival there?
Yeah, they had their first yarn festival called Tangled Galashiels, which was fabulous. It wasn't a huge one in the scheme of things. It was about 20 vendors, but it was wonderful. And with the textile heritage in the Borders, it was even more significant having it there.
I'm to the point where I feel like if I don't get to the Borders in the next year, I'm going to have some explaining to do.
You have an excuse, you're across the Atlantic. I'm only an hour away. I've never been to the Borders as much as I have in the last year.
I know, but as much time as I spend in Scotland, it's like, what is wrong with you? Why have you not made the trip there yet? I don't know. And then, of course, each of the issues has had feature articles about different makers and designers, wool producers, things like that. One interesting thread that keeps coming up over and over in these articles especially about the yarn producers, is the fact that they're seeing the wool just going to waste around them, and they decide to do something about it. They decide to either with their own flock or with a group of other people get together and get that wool processed and into other people's hands.
That's part of the question that I'm trying to understand, looking to understand is there something wrong? And I don't know if wrong is the correct word, in our system that means that a lot of our wool is being burnt or buried. And there does seem to be quite a disconnection between what it could be used for. And actually, I know from conversation that we've started with the Scottish Government that they assume, and there are assumptions from bodies who possibly should be representing Scottish wool, that it's too poor quality to do anything with. Tell that to the 40 plus farms and crofts that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there are plenty more I'm not aware of yet, who are turning that fleece into the most beautiful characterful yarn. And they're assuming that sheep are for meat. We've got this meat producing pyramid system, which I understand is quite unique to Britain. And some of the sheep involved in this pyramid, Blueface Leicesters and Texels, beautiful fleece, let alone the Cheviots and the Scottish Blackface. They just don't, they treat the fleece as if it's a byproduct that is just a nuisance. So there's something in the system that doesn't quite make sense. And it's absolutely wonderful that we've got these farms and crofts who are doing something differently. Yeah. And then it's what next? How do you build on that? How do you get them support? And an awful lot of, I think, is awareness and joining the dots. So I've got some exciting stuff going on around that, but I think that's going to be the rest of my life's work, which is good because this is what I wanted to immerse myself in.
There you go. Keep you busy. I think we've just lost a lot of knowledge. We have a broken connection from when we got our man-made textiles and everyone got very excited about how cheap and, color fast and machine washable and everything that those were. And we had, I think, probably 2.5 generations that are separated from when we were using wool and linen and silk and things like that in our everyday lives. And we've forgotten how durable it can be, how color fast it can be, how some of it may not be machine washable, but it can be very easily cleaned in other ways, and that it will not clog landfills and pollute water and, all of these other things. I think there's so much re-education that needs to happen. Education
and awareness so that people, so whether it's product manufacturers or whether it's consumers, us buying clothes, for example, are just aware. I like to think of it, it's both understanding what's not so good about synthetic fibres necessarily, so moving away from that, but also moving towards by understanding the absolute positives and benefits of some of these natural fibres. I've heard a couple of people talk about they're getting a presentation and somebody's selling this miracle fibre and they describe the properties. It's fire retardant, it's water resistant, you hardly need to wash it. And then they say it's wool.
Yeah.
What? I thought you were talking about some newly invented fibre that
Right.
NASA have come up with. No, it's wool.
No, it's just wool. That's what we've been using. One really interesting article in issue 3 actually was about seed.ed.
Yeah.
The group there at one of the universities in
Edinburgh College of Art, part of Edinburgh University.
Yeah, where they're having the students, the textile students, actually growing the flax, processing it, spinning it, using it. And I think that's really important because they are going to be the ones who are working in fashion design. Because it's one thing to say, I can tell people that, I'm wearing a wool shirt right now. It's summer, I'm wearing a wool shirt. It's way more comfortable than my cotton shirts are, even in the heat. It's one thing for me to say that, but then for people to go to the website where they can buy it, because there's no place local that sells wool shirts to them, and find out that the wool shirt is on sale $80 when they can go down to their local shop and buy one made out of cotton or made out of, a cotton poly blend for less than $10. So it's really, I think we need to be educating the designers and the manufacturers and get the production up to scale so that they're producing large amounts, and get the cost down that way. I don't know.
Yeah. Ron, I think part of that education and awareness is understanding what's involved in creating these fibres, whether you're growing them or you're making them out of petrochemicals.
Right.
So what Edinburgh College of Art are partly doing is by giving the students and their colleagues actually the hands-on experience. And apparently they have people at lunchtime just going and watching the flax grow. So they've got it mainly in troughs just around the campus. Right. And I see pictures on Instagram. You can feed them seed_ed, I think it's called on there. Go and watch the flax grow. It's fabulous. And we, like a lot of countries, I suspect, are struggling with a shortage of skills around textiles. We're forgetting what we knew, an ageing workforce. And the mills that we do still have, so whether they're the knitwear mills or whether we have very, very few fibre processing mills anymore, what they're needing hands-on skills, like just knowing how to handle the fibre, understanding its properties, whether it's wool or flax or anything else. And they need the technical skills, so they need the people who know how to program the knitting machines. Mm-hmm. But if you also have the experience in finishing a garment and you understand the properties, that's what Seed.ed are trying to do, is give that broad experience. Because I think it's been a bit of a snobbery, if that's the right word, in this country, of you can't be a maker, you have to be the designer. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, possibly getting into the art versus craft thing as well, no, there's no one is better than the other. We need them all, they all have value and they all have massive skill involved. We were talking a little before, and I mentioned that I was at the Metropolitan Museum in New York and for a Karl Lagerfeld exhibit where they had dozens and dozens of his designs on display. But the first room that you walk into, they had maybe 10 designs. I don't remember now, but they would have his sketch of what the garment was supposed to look like. And they would have the finished garment. And then on the wall, there were these screens who were interviews with the women who actually made the garment from the sketch. And the amount of skill, no, I'm not throwing any shade on Karl Lagerfeld. He was an incredible designer. But these women were taking hastily drawn sketches and using their skill and knowledge and know-how and creating geometric shapes and flow, and the amount of study and skill and experience that goes into that is as impressive, if not more so, honestly, than the person who drew the design. And I completely agree with you. It's the person who can translate that design into a finished garment and it fits the model beautifully. So I have incredible respect for people who go into the creation part of fashion. And this is not something I think that we think about. And it's not something I would think about if I didn't have a daughter who is interested in fashion and is off herself to study fashion. Seeing it through her eyes has exposed me to a lot of this.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of skill and the amount of respect due to the people who are doing the actual making, not just the designers. Yeah.
And a big part of it is because our society, Britain anyway, wants people to be the designer, not to be the maker. Whereas a designer is better if they understand what's possible. And
Right.
actually, speaking to Di Gilpin, there's a big article about Di in issue 2. She works with various people. It's amazing what she's done and is doing. She's such an advocate for Scottish wool and Scottish textiles. One company that she works with is called La Fetiche, and they're a small fashion house that's based between Glasgow and Paris. And she'll take the sketch from one of the designers there and translate that actually into a finished garment. And she's got a certain number of couture pieces that her knitwear studio will hand knit. And then she's also advising them and other companies as well how to challenge what machine knitting can do to translate the designer's design into something that can be more mass produced, so they can produce more of them. And just but that it's that experience as a maker to translate the design and the trusted relationship that she's built up with some of these companies over years. I mean, she's like a lot of places in Scotland is actually turning away business. There is so much demand, and as I said earlier, we're never going to be mass producers here, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's fantastic to hear about the demand that there is for what we do have, and joining the dots about, because Di, for example, works with Dumfries House. It's one of the now King Charles's Prince's Trust, and they've been working to train people to possibly work in couture knitting, couture hand knitting, by teaching them the skills. And that was the Knitwise project, which I think they're in year 3 out of a 3-year programme with a group of people that can come and go. So these things and awareness of this, and then just joining all these dots, oh my goodness, the conversations and the linking it all together. As I say, not going to run out of content.
Yeah. And this is all stuff that you can read about in issue 2. That article about Di was absolutely fascinating. Of course, I'm aware of who Di Gilpin is, but I was not aware of how much she has done and been involved with the larger fashion industry and Nike and designing the first knit shoe, oh my gosh.
Yeah. She would never say that she invented the knitted trainer, but I suppose you can't make these claims. But I'm trying to read everything that was happening around 2012, 2013 when these trainers first came out, and they're the ones that the fabric is knitted, if you look carefully at your shoes, rather than it being woven.
Right.
Because knitted fabric, and depending on the stitch construction you use, is more flexible and moves in different ways. Mm-hmm. So Di was approached by Nike and worked with them for a while, and she was using Ganzi stitches to work out or help them understand how a knitted fabric could work. So when you look at the pearl bumps on your knitted trainers, a lot of it may have gone back to that work, and she's given me permission to have a picture of that. One of the first 2 prototypes is actually in the magazine as well. But the product design, going back to these heritage skills and seeing that evolution and that bit of the story, it's fascinating.
One thing I'm curious about, because he has come up, is Prince / now King Charles, and whether you think that now that he is king, if that's going to have an impact on the work he's been doing to promote wool.
What I've been hearing is Prince William that's not necessarily what he's particularly interested in. So the next Prince of Wales is not necessarily going to be the person to take over the Prince's Trust. But we're hearing, and I hope it's not a big secret, but I'm about to say anyway, I think it's a guy called Viscount Linley, who is himself a carpenter. I might be saying the wrong thing here, but he's a very, very skilled artisan in his own right, which must give him then an appreciation of handmade things. Apparently he is going to be the person who takes over a lot of what now King Charles was doing. But Charles and Queen Camilla are very supportive still, and will remain supportive of textiles, and will continue. It can't be in the same hands-on way that Prince Charles was involved, but it's very much still there. I think some of the people who were invited to the coronation, they were I can't remember the name of the television program. Got this television program where they Restoration Yard. I can't remember the name, but some of the people who are involved in that program, but actually are advocates for the Princess Trust and those handmade skills, they're very much, I think, part of the royal household circle.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. And one of my questions to you is actually going to be if you've seen any positive movement since starting the journal, and it sounds like you have.
Well, I think so. I maybe it's things that I'm just aware of now that I've moved into this space. So it probably is, I'm just aware of things that I wasn't involved with before. But I do think there is more talk about Scottish wool. So, for example, we've got what was the Perth Festival of Yarn is now been rebranded as the Scottish Yarn Festival, which takes place in Perth every September. But they've got a spin-off event which happens in the spring called the Scottish Wool Producers Showcase. And that's only happened for the second time this year. And it's just wonderful. And it's the farms and the crofts who can getting together. And the interest, it was quite a small event, but the interest in that and just being aware that these people are there. And one of the things I'm going to do is, and actually I'm launching it at this event, the Regenerative Textile Scotland event at the beginning of July, is those 40 farms and crofts who are turning fleece into yarn, as I said earlier, that I am aware of so far. I'm going to just make a flyer with a map of Scotland on it, just plotting them and with the details of who they are, so that when I'm at yarn shows and exhibitions and talking to people, and the people I talk to who I think should know better or have the information or should be representing Scottish wools, who are saying things like, well, it's too poor quality to do anything with, there you go. Tell that to those 40, like the Berlin Yarn Company, Uist Wool, Iona Wool. They don't have their information. So,
yeah.
Yes.
We need to talk about issue 3 because we have a make-along coming up. And in order to do the make-along, people are going to have to get this issue. And lucky them, because it's another fantastic issue. Each of your issues have had like a theme. Issue 1 was serendipity. Issue 2 was sustainability. And then for issue 3, you're talking about regenerative fibers. And I know a lot of people who are used to working with wool, you already know that wool is a regenerative fiber. It grows on the animals. We can use it, as you were saying a moment ago, soil to soil, comes from the grass. The animals process it, becomes wool. It can biodegrade back to the ground. But you also have so much in this issue about linen, and we touched on it at the beginning as well. And one of the things that you mentioned was that you weren't aware of just how huge the Scottish linen production was before you started this issue. So what was it that got you to explore linen in the first place then, if you weren't aware of Scotland's wool?
It was a good question. It was actually a challenge from a chap called John Ennis, who has written one of the other articles in issue 3. So he runs a sort of design company called Journeys in Design. And he's not just looking at linen, but also at concrete. But I don't know anything about that side. And we met for a coffee, just got in touch because he'd seen issue 1. He, luckily, like a lot of people, said, this is fantastic. There's so many stories to tell. There's this whole story about linen, of when are you going to tell it? And I on my big list of content for future issues, I do have all the individual fibres, I suppose you could call it. So cotton, jute, cashmere, and linen was on there. But probably the one that I know the absolute least about. But when John actually put down that challenge, and I think I was just beginning to think about what the theme might be. And theme is maybe too strong a word. It's just a sort of broad word theme that I go into an issue with. Well, issue 3, spring summer 2023. Let's just do it there. That sounds good. And what I wanted to do was find out which of the yarn companies in Scotland were using linen as well. I haven't found any yet that are actually using homegrown linen, but there are some amazing dye of the indie dyers who are dyeing yarn that has linen in it. And some of the designs actually feature some of that yarn. So yeah, so that's how it came. It was a conversation and a challenge. So, yeah, okay. And quite often I find that I'll have a conversation with somebody and one thing leads to another. Like it's a complete coincidence that went and met the kilt makery, and that's turned into, because of some other topics I've got on the list, that issue 4 theme is likely to be the kilt.
Oh, awesome. There's multiple articles about linen, and they all sort of build on one another, provide different facts about one another. And one of them that really struck me was Source Material Strands of Memory by Jenny Reed, where she talked about her use of linen as an artist to create cyanotypes. And then also the other artist, Lynn Hawking, who had an installation in a museum representing 7 generations of linen weavers from her family. Both of them were moving. One was more sort of community based. Like this was our community used to be this huge linen production thing. And then the other Lynn's was very personal, very, these are my family ties. And at one point I found myself tearing up thinking of all these connections that we find community wise and through our families with textiles. And I think one trap we fall into is thinking that, well, that was in that community in Scotland, or that was in that family. And we forget that fabric creation was a massive part of life. And almost all of us have these ties, either to fabric creation on an industrial scale or just in our homes.
I know. And even, there's an article about Anne Sewell, who's a weaver and owns Weft Blowen, the spinning and weaving supplies in West Kilbride. And she said it was quite a recent realisation that her family's involvement in the jute mills in Dundee, she still has family in Dundee, but she'd had no idea actually how strong the connection was. It's funny, or maybe it isn't funny, because a lot of people I'm talking to in textiles, but they haven't realised about this history, that then they are now working in textiles. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's not so unusual because it was so big that, as you say, there was some connection somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
Haven't found mine yet. my family came from, I think, the Isle of Man, Germany, and Ireland. Somewhere
in there, most likely. There's, again,
bound fabric. To be. Need to find it. But my gran in the lace making, I think, is pretty good.
Yeah. We are running short on time. And I do want to talk about the make-along that we have coming up. So I will give details after our interview, just because I know we're running a little tight on time. The make-along is starting on June 28th. It will last until August 10th. And we're going to have an Instagram live to kick it off. And again, I'll give more details after this. But in order to take part in our make-along, we are asking people to make one of the 10 patterns that is at the back of this issue of the magazine. And we should say that every issue of the journal has a collection of patterns at the back. I have settled on 3 that I'm hoping to get done. And if I do get all 3 done, I'm going to treat myself to the yarn for the sea pink top and do a 4th. But I'm hoping to do the Macaire tank top, the twine bag, and the magnolia cowl. First 2 are crochet. The last one is pin loom weaving, which I've never done before. I'm very excited about that. Are you going to be making along with us as we do this, Susan? Or have you thought, you've done it all before?
No, not at all, because I need to count it up, but there's 2 of the patterns that I didn't make, because either the designer made the second sample. So I like to have all the samples in at least 2 colorways in the photographs, just to help people see how wonderful they look.
Yeah.
Yeah, the designer made, and the wool producer, Fibre Dyer, made those samples, and then my sister makes a couple, just because we haven't got time to make them all. I haven't got time, although I'd like to. So there's the Robach shawl, which I've not made yet, and the sea pink top, those 2. And I have to confess, I have started the shawl in advance, but that's mainly so that I can share as we're going through my progress, because after we start 28th of June, I'll be well into making the samples for issue 4.
Oh, right.
But I want to be joining in and just share the excitement of the progress and the making. So I'm trying to be a little bit organised.
Yeah.
But I'm really looking forward to making both, actually.
Well, that's okay. I won't tell anyone if you don't tell anyone.
I think we just told everybody.
Oh, no. I do love how wearable the designs are, and that they are, this is a spring summer issue, and they are spring summer designs. They are things that you can wear spring summer, even like the tank top and things. That's something that could be a layering piece very easily in the wintertime if you wanted to. And the Thonen top as well could be something that you could wear 3 seasons or 4 seasons. As you are collecting designs from people, are you approaching people and asking them, can you do a top? Can you do a shawl? Or are you approaching the designers and saying, I need something for this issue?
It's a mix of both. I mean, I did go into issue 3 wanting summer tops, and it being Scotland, summer tops, as you say, can be quite heavy wool and still wear them. So we're quite lucky in that regard. So it's a combination of both. It's like the articles. It's the result of a conversation, which leads to, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Or I'll reach out to a designer. It might be one that I've worked with already, and ask them, like Maddie Harvey, for example. She did the Monet shawl in issue 2. It's absolutely beautiful, using the Silly Sheep Fibre Company, Fleeceweight. And she's done the Karstramon as a t-shirt top using a yarn that's got linen in it in issue 3. So I don't think I'll ever do open calls, mainly because I never want to reject anyone. But I have increasingly, I'm delighted to say, had people, designers, and they may not have ever published a pattern, but people who have a design, and then depending on what's coming up, just have a conversation with them and see what comes out of it. Quite organic, I think, the process.
It sounds like a cliche phrase, but I think there's something here for everyone. There's different shawls, there's crochet, there's knit. As I said, there's the pin loom for those of you who are wanting to try something new. And I will say that you do have a nice variety of craft in each issue. It's not all knit or all crochet. There's a variety for different makers to give different styles a try. I am very excited for the make along, and I will give all the details afterwards. So everyone stay tuned a few moments. And thank you for coming on the show and talking about the journal with me, Susan.
No, thank you so much. It's always great to chat, and lots of chat, I think, at our Instagram lives when we actually get into the make along as well.
Oh, yes, that's true. I didn't talk about the prizes. I didn't talk about that. We're going to do more make-along, more Instagram lives as it's progressing, hopefully with some of the designers that have them come on to Instagram and chat with us too. It's going to be a lot of fun. Susan and I talked about a lot of stuff in this episode, and I'll make sure that you get all the details after.
Well, you're helping me make sure that I really don't ever run out of content, because there's just so many things, isn't there? It's wonderful.
Yeah, we went down a lot of alleys.
That's the fun of it, the joy of it.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Susan.
Many thanks again to Susan. I don't know how apparent it was from the interview, but we spent quite a bit of time on tangents as we recorded, as proper nerds do when they find a nerd with the same interest. There is so much to learn about Scottish textiles. I know Susan will be busy for years to come. A few more things before I go. As promised, all the details I have about the make-along, you will need issue 3 of the Journal of Scottish Yarns to participate. But once you have issue 3, you are welcome to knit, crochet, or weave anything from that issue. We are officially starting at an Instagram live event at 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. British time on my account, so make sure you're following I Thought I Knew How, and mark your calendars so you can pop in. You will be able to watch it after if you're at work or otherwise busy. I know that's sort of early for those of us in the US, but we wanted to pick a time that would be as inclusive as possible. And I do have listeners all across Europe and, into Australia and stuff. And that was the best time we could come up with. We encourage you to use the yarn the designer used. However, we also support sustainable, earth-friendly practices with this make-along. So if you have a suitable stash yarn, or if you have a yarn producer near you that you'd like to support, it is fine if you'd like to substitute the yarn for the make-along. That said, especially if you are substituting yarn, I want to remind you that it is important to swatch. I will be starting the make-along with the Macaire tank top, and I swatched with 7 different alternative yarns before making my final decision. Fiber content, spin type, it all makes a difference. So if you are eager to get going on the make-along, I'd encourage you to use this gap time to do some swatching so you're really ready to go and hit the ground running. The make-along will take place on Instagram, where we will use the hashtag YarnMAL2023. It will also take place in the I Thought I Knew How Facebook group, where you can post to each week's prompt thread or make your own posts. And it will be on Ravelry in the I Thought I Knew How community board, where each weekly prompt will have its own thread for people to post to. Please pick one place to submit your entries each week, though, not all three. So, what entries? Each week, we will post a prompt for people to accomplish. So, for a little hint, the first one will be to post a picture of your started project. If you do happen to start early, be sure to get a photo of that. The final prompt will be to post a photo of your finished project. And each week in between, we will have different prompts for what we'd like you to post. Watch my Instagram at I Thought I Knew How and the I Thought I Knew How groups on Facebook and Ravelry to see those prompts. As we do the make-along, we will have Instagram Lives with the various designers and yarn makers involved in issue 3. Those are still being finalized as far as who's doing which Instagram Live when, but I will announce them in advance for you to mark your calendars. So far, each of those Instagram Lives will also have a prize for someone who attends live, so if you can make it, be sure to pop in. The weekly prizes include things like copies of issue 1 and 2 of the journal, kits to create projects from those issues, yarn from producers to make things in issue 3, and more. They are very generous prizes, and a lot of them will be given away during the event. So be sure to get issue 3 and join in. We will finish officially on August 8th. You will have until August 9th to post your finished item to qualify for the final prize, and we'll announce the winner on August 10th. You are welcome to make more than one item from the magazine. I am hoping to finish 3, and if I can, since I cannot win the prizes as host, I'm going to treat myself to the yarn for a 4th project. The 3 I plan to make are the Macaire tank top, as I said. I'll actually be doing a size larger because my swatch crocheted up slightly smaller than I need, but I like the fabric and the yarn, so I'm going for it. The fit should be fine around, and I'll pay attention to length as I go. I'll also be doing the twine bag, which is another crochet project. This is going to be my summer of crochet, I guess. The bag is made by crocheting motifs and connecting them all up, and it's about the size of an average purse. And I look forward to going through my button stash when I'm done because it calls for a big statement button, and I have a habit of picking those up and not having a use for them. Finally, I'll be making the Magnolia cowl, which is made on a pin loom. I have never used a pin loom before. You make 3-inch squares on it and then sew them up into the cowl. I picked up a Zoom loom and gave it a go the other night to test my yarn choice, and it was so fun. The directions that came with the loom were the clearest directions I've ever gotten with a piece of crafting equipment, so don't feel nervous about trying it. The designer, Ange Sewell, has kits for those in the UK if you'd like to order from her. I'll put a link in the show notes. Otherwise, I was able to get my loom on Amazon, and I'll stick a link for that in the show notes for those in the US. Also, be sure to check your local yarn store or do some Googling if you're elsewhere in the world and you need to get a pin loom because you want to do the Magnolia cowl too. And if I can get all 3 of those done, I'm going to get the yarn to do the sea pink top, which is a yoke sweater with sea pink flowers around the yoke, and it's short sleeve, and it's done in DK, so it should be a quick knit. And fingers crossed. I know a lot of people are planning to start off with the sea pink one, so I'm curious to see everyone's color combinations before I settle on mine, because I might do mine in brown because I have a brown sweater addiction. So my swatching is all officially done, and the only thing keeping me from getting started, honestly, is I have a project with a deadline I'm trying to get finished before the make-along starts. I won't. So I'll be working on both at the same time, but that's okay too. I have only put a few glimpses of this project on social media, but once it's done, I can share, and I will. Second thing, as I finish up this episode, the Shetland Wool Week class schedule has been released for people who got the membership. I'm thinking about doing a lunch or dinner meetup for listeners. I did one a few years back and it was really nice. It was nice to meet everybody and have a little chat and have dinner with people. It also, it can be kind of lonely to travel to Shetland Wool Week, especially if you're traveling on your own and you see people in classes and stuff and all the social times, but then it comes to dinner time and you're kind of like, I guess I'll go eat alone in a restaurant. So let's not do that. Let's get together with some other people and have an hour, 90 minutes together, chatting and getting to know one another. I would reserve the spot in the restaurant and everyone would be responsible for their own bill. So easy peasy. Are people interested in doing that this year? Of course, I don't know what I'll manage to get tickets for when the time comes, and I still would need to make sure I can find a spot in a restaurant somewhere. But at this point, it looks like I could do dinner on one of the last 3 nights. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, September 29th through August 1st. Another option would be to look for somewhere to have a breakfast meetup on Wednesday, the 27th, though that would be trickier because there's very few restaurants and cafes in town that are open for breakfast hours. But if you would be interested in doing any of these things, please let me know. And if I can get at least 6 people who are firmly committed, I'll move forward. In the meantime, as I said before, I do hope to be back with you next week, but do check the show notes for the information about the make-along, because I really hope you'll join us. But for now, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit.